Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar, the Columbia Business School Executive Education webinar around the topic of quantitative intuition. I have with me today Chris, Paul. The three of us together actually have developed this concept, set of tools, and framework around this notion of quantitative intuition that we want to share with all of you today. Just a few logistics around today. This is all recorded. Everybody who's registered will receive a video of today's webinar. After the webinar, please share with us on Twitter at CBS Exec Ed on Twitter. And please send your Q&A during the webinar. We will leave 10 minutes at the end of it for a discussion around the topic of QI, quantitative intuition. Again, great pleasure to have all of you with us, as well as Chris Frank and Paul Magnone with us. So quantitative intuition. We all live in a world of big data, a world where it seems like we have more data that we can handle. And yet when we get to actually solve a problem, right? When you guys are facing your problems at Google, at American Express, it always feels like we don't have actually enough data. We don't have the right data. We always feel like we are struggling, even though supposedly we're supposed to have more data than we ever had, right? So what's happening really? Why is that?
It's a bit ironic, isn't it, Oded? We live in a world of big data, and we used to say what gets measured gets done. Yet everything can get measured, and it seems like, sometimes nothing gets done these days, especially on the front lines. And, one thing we've seen from in meetings, one of the biggest challenges is, how do you make effective decisions with information? And more importantly, how do you make them at the right speed and also make decisions that have impact? And, first of all, I want to dispel something about data. You don't need to be a math whiz. You don't need to know how to crunch data to actually use it to make an effective decision. And in fact, that's one of the principles of why we developed quantitative intuition. And the other thing around why QI is we want to make decisions that stick. And how many times have we been in meetings where we think a decision is made, and then all of a sudden you leave that meeting and that decision all of a sudden becomes unraveled? So, there's this tension between we have the information today, yet we need to make faster decisions, yet decisions aren't being made effectively. And, how do we actually use that information to really make smarter decisions? So I love this quote. It's from a Scottish poet, and I want to highlight it's from 1912. He uses statistics as a drunken man uses a lamppost for support rather than illumination. And if you just stop and think about that for a second, can we use data and evidence and the information we have really, to illuminate rather than just to lean on and get tied up in the data? And it seems like more meetings that have data, we get tied up in that decision-making process or, in that data rather than actually making a decision. The other quote, a little bit more recent, is from McKinsey. Let's just focus on the bottom half of your screen here. And in 2018, the United States alone could face a shortage of 140,000 to 190,000 people with deep analytic skills. Okay, so there's a gap there. But I think what is more telling is 10 times that, 1.5 million managers and analysts with the know-how to use analysis of data to make effective decisions. And that's what we're speaking about today. So that's why I would say QI. What about you, Paul?
Yeah, and the other part that I love about that quote, think about it, 2018 is the projection. Do we have 1.5 million managers that are really effectively making decisions today? It's 2019, we're already here. Are we trained properly? Are we really thinking about this holistically for our business? And I think most of us see that we're not pretty consistently.
And I can tell you from the more education point of view, we have spent a lot of effort in education, these 140,000 to the 190,000 of these people with deep analytical skills, all of these data science type of programs. What we haven't done enough is thinking about the tenfold shortage, right? And again, that's why the three of us came together with QI.
Right. So when you think about the shortage, And it's very much a shortage of leadership, right? So it's the proverbial needle in the haystack. And as a leader, are you stepping up to the challenge to say, let's interrogate the data properly. Let's be ruthless as we interrogate the data. Let's form the teams the right way so that we can actually get to the answers that we're looking for. Are we trying to inform people about information, and so we have one modality of working? Are we trying to compel an action, so there's another modality of working? Are we even thinking about that, or do we just see this large pile of data, or hay in the image here, and you're trying to find that one needle that it's just a prayer? You might find it someday, you might not. What are your techniques to make sure that you find what you're looking for?
And Paul, you just mentioned something very interesting. This almost decision tree between inform versus compel. And I think that is a critical and practical point where, as leaders, as decision makers, we need to start. So ask yourself, the minute you have to make a decision or you're in a meeting looking at data, am I looking at data just to help inform and almost FYI? Or am I looking for that data to compel some specific action? And that inform versus compel is a critical junction point to understand.
Which lead us to, by now we probably mentioned QI, Quantitative Intuition, about 100 times, but we haven't actually defined it. So here is the formal definition that Chris, Paul, and I have formulated for what is quantitative intuition. And I'm going to read it of your slide. The ability to make decisions with incomplete information via precision questioning and business acumen driven by pattern recognition. This requires parallel view of the issue that matter rather than just a logical sequence of thoughts to see the situation as a whole. This is what we have defined as a quantitative intuition. You can see that it has three components to it. We are talking about precision questioning, pattern recognition, and parallel view. And if you look into this definition, you probably realize there isn't a lot of math in it. There isn't a lot of what we generally call data science in it. There is, again, the 1.5 million shortage of it, much more of what do we as managers need to do with this information. I want to give you an example of what we mean by a quantitative intuition manager. I'm sure you've all been in that situation. You're sitting there in a meeting, slide after slide after slide of tables and information. And again, the difference between probably the old world of small data to the new world of big data, this deck grew from being 15 slide deck, now it's a 30 slide deck because we have so many more tables, right? And you have this manager, she's sitting there and, slide number 11, suddenly she raises her hand and she goes, stop, 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 stop. This number doesn't match the number on slide number 8, right? So what did this manager do, right? I mean, how did she, and again, we've all seen it, we're all very impressed by that point, right? But what really did she do? Did she calculate logarithm in her head? Did she calculate square roots? None of these, right? It's the ability to A, ask precision questioning, B, to identify a pattern that is not necessarily within the slide, but rather parallel across different slides and comparing numbers. And it often requires, as the definition suggests, the way to figure out that this number doesn't make sense. First, it's probably hurt in her stomach, right? She says, this number doesn't feel right. It probably hurt in the stomach because she brought into the meeting with her business acumen. So the way she brought in the intuition from often business acumen and then pour that onto the data that is being presented to her in the meeting to identify patterns and through parallel view throughout the presentation, as opposed to let me just pay attention to what is actually being shown to me at this point in time. So what we are going to do in the next 10 minutes or so, we're going to reveal each one of these three pillars, if you will, of QI. And that's, in fact, when we teach the whole program on it, we dedicate each day to each one of these pillars, to the pillar of precision questioning. Chris, Paul, and I believe that the smartest person in the room is the one with the right questions, not necessarily with the right answers. How do we become good and skilled at asking the right question and asking precise questions? How do we identify patterns in the data and become, as Paul mentioned, first interrogators of data? And then how do we actually synthesize the whole thing? One question we often being asked is, okay, this is all great and quantitative intuition, but can you really teach intuition? I mean, is it possible? Isn't it something that we either have or don't, right? The theory of learning actually has two dimensions to it. There is a dimension of competence and the dimension of consciousness. At the lowest level of learning, we are incompetent unconscious, meaning we don't even know what it is that we don't know. And then, hopefully, we attend a few webinars, and suddenly we are consciously incompetent, meaning at least we realize what it is that we don't know, right? So I'm at least aware of the things I don't know, and then hopefully through spending some more time with this, we are getting to the level of consciously competent, right? Think about a toddler starting to walk. A toddler starting to walk is consciously competent. They need to pay a lot of effort and attention in order to being able actually to walk. Think about your first couple of days of driving, for those of you who are driving. And then through repeated application of it, we actually get to the highest level of learning where we become unconsciously competent. We don't even need to think about it when it becomes second habit, right? Or second nature. Quantitative intuition is along these lines, meaning we start by understanding the tools, understanding the skills that are needed in order to uncover these three pillars of precision questioning, pattern recognition, as well as parallel view. But it's through the reapplication that we can get to a point of it becomes a second nature. That manager who was asking this question, it's through doing it over and over again that it simply becomes something she just regularly does, right? And again, we're all familiar with these types of managers. So I want to start now opening these pillars, and I want to start with precision questioning. Chris, what's in this pillar? What is precision questioning?
Yeah, so Oded, you said something very interesting earlier around the smartest person in the room isn't the one with the answer, it's the one that asks the question. And let's think about that for a minute. So we talk around really developing practical skills and, how do we grow in our career? We all think, we need to prepare and we need to study for the test. But that is only, that answer is only as good, if it's a very specific problem that you're trying to solve. The ability to ask a question and to have, that skill is a much more powerful skill as you go into a meeting. So think about how many situations have we been in when, you prepare for weeks for that big presentation, you develop that slide deck, you write your talking points, and you go into that meeting, and within the first 5 or 10 minutes, the senior manager, she asks one question, and all of a sudden, we're like a deer in headlights. And I think we've all been there. And we're like, how was it that she was able to kind of pierce through all this analysis and all of this aggregation and curation that I did preparing for this and get at the heart of the issue? And really, that is the power of precision questioning. I think a great analogy is from Alice in Wonderland. And if you're familiar with the story, I'll just talk through this very quick snippet of it. But Alice looks into the looking glass, and as you see on your screen, she says to the looking glass, "Would you tell me, please, where I want to go from here?" And the cat, answers back and says, "Well, it depends where you want to get to." And Alice is like, "Well, I really don't care very much." And then the cat says, "Well, it doesn't really matter where you go." And, sometimes, we look at this and, some of you may be nodding your head, and that may be some meetings that you've been in, or some, teams that you've been part of and try to make a decision. We have data in front of us. And all of a sudden we're just spinning. And it's a little bit of looking in that looking glass. Well, where are we going? And people's like, well, I'm not really sure, but we have the information. So let's just, and you keep spinning and keep spinning. Yet we all are there and we want to make a decision. So the ability to ask a question, and let me give you some very practical, simple questions you could ask. First of all, you always want to look at data in context. So if anyone ever gives you a data point in a meeting, in a presentation, and they don't give you context, one of the first things you should ask for is, how does this compare to something we've done in the past? So context could be within, your own company, your own situation. Context could be competitively. How does this look, how our competitors compare? So always look at data in context. The second point around precision questioning, 3 magic words: help me understand. And that opens up the dialogue. So a lot of times when people ask questions, regardless of level, it doesn't have to do with your expertise, your level, your experience. You're actually trying to open up the dialogue. So help me understand is a second practical technique around precision questioning. And then the third thing is when you look at data or someone is making a recommendation, try to go to what we say the extremes. If we are wildly successful, will we have enough, resources to support that? Or if we stop this program or shut down this product, and by going to the extremes, when you're looking at a recommendation, a decision, or a data point, it really allows you to pressure test that. So some very practical techniques around precision questioning. Help me understand, put data in context, go to the extremes.
Let's move to the second pillar, Paul, pattern recognition.
Yeah, so quickly in pattern recognition, if we think about there's a mode of operating where you are looking at the data, but you need to look up and understand what problem are we solving, right? So this is the natural place where we think it's all about tools and analytics and artificial intelligence and every other magical thing that would come along. And in fact, that's part of it, but it's very much about behavior and about how an organization is set up and how you motivate your team to be that fierce interrogator that we talked about before. And what does it mean to be a fierce interrogator? It's to be brave and to say, I'm not sure that this makes sense, or are we focusing on the right thing? So here's a typical example that I know I've lived through, others here have lived through. Go figure out if there's a business around this. And this is a blank sheet of paper with one word on it. Go figure out if there's a business. Well, what would you do? There's no data around that. You gave me one word. Well, I've lived through this. There's plenty of data. I went out and saw 78 customers in 120 days. And the key is every step of the way, there were course corrections because we kept on coming back to what is the essential question, building on what Chris was talking about before. If you're Alice in Wonderland and you don't care where you're going, well then 78 conversations are going to lead you to 78 outputs or perhaps even more. We focused in and kept on refining back. And it's like sailing, it's course corrections. Are we reinforcing, are we proving a point? Are we proving the hypothesis so that we can make a business choice? And from that, you go from the data to the analysis to a checkpoint on the conclusions, and then you iterate. You're going up and down to really validate what's happening. And then that leads to the next step that Oded will talk about, which is you're not just giving a book report. You're synthesizing that information to get to a crystallized, clear decision that validates the essential question and allows your business to make a choice. So what does it mean to synthesize data?
Yeah, and indeed, this notion of quantitative intuition is truly about going up and down this elevator from data to analysis to conclusion to the business problem and back to the data as needed. And QI, the combination, again, it sounds like an oxymoron, quantitative and intuition. It's only when you put these together that you've developed this muscle or this skill to be able to go up and down this elevator. Going towards synthesis versus summary, one thing we see over and over and again is the tendency of people to take the easier route towards summary, towards the facts. Let me just restate what we have seen here, right? And I want to illustrate it with a very, very simple example. In fact, arguably not a data example, but I think makes the points very clear. Take a minute and just read through this example of this administrative assistant.
So this is like every meeting I've ever had.
Right.
Right? All sorts of inputs and who knows where it goes.
And we've been over and over in this situation of that administrative assistant situation, right? I want to show you a second version of the same thing. Much better, isn't it? So I won't ask you actually which one you prefer, but rather I want to ask you what is the difference between the one on the left and the one on the right, and the headers actually already give out the answer. What you saw on the left is a summary, is a restatement of the fact. She worked really hard. In fact, she probably spent 2 hours on this meeting trying to schedule it, and she ends it with a question. What do you think? The one on the right, which is the one we all hope to get, right, is actually the synthesis of the information. Not only that she told you what you need to know and only what you need to know, rather than summarizing all of the information, but actually she poured her own judgment into it. She said, the meeting is going to be at 11, and these are the reasons for it, right? If you want to make the analogy of that to a typical presentation with data, that's like putting the conclusion at the top of your slide, and then under that, give me maybe 3 bullet points of why you made that conclusion. Synthesize the information, put your judgment into a decision, and then explain to me how you got there. The reason why we are more likely to get summaries, and there's several reasons why we are more likely to get summary than synthesis. A, it is easier. B, it's riskless. When you're just restating what is in the data, the only way you could be wrong is the data wrong. Otherwise, you're always right. When you're going towards synthesis, you're going towards a point where you are pouring now your own judgment onto it, which may or may not be right. But you're always advancing the discussion. We're actually pouring the synthesis into it. And part of the concept of QI, part of the concept of a parallel view, holistic view, is to learn to make this leap from merely summarize mainly the what towards synthesis, which is the so what and the now what.
Yeah, so let's just wrap it up because I want to make sure that we have enough times for Q&A. So there's 3, you could just build it. So there are 3 parts to QI. We talked about precision questioning. Don't expect the data to provide both the question and the answer. There's an abbreviation here called IWIX, and IWIX stands for I wish I knew. So think about that acronym. When you are in a meeting or going into a meeting, what do you wish you knew? And keep in the essential question or the business problem in mind. And make sure, importantly, when you think around the IWIX and the business problem, first of all, do a quick check around the table or with your colleague. Do we all have the same understanding of what we're trying to achieve? Because a lot of times we'll find out we may be asking different questions or pulling in different data, but we also have a different outcome in mind. So precision questioning, most important, powerful skill and capability you could develop. And we talked about some practical techniques. Pattern recognition. Be a fierce interrogator of data. And what do we mean by that? Put data in context, look at the change over time, look at how you've done as a business unit or that product has done over time, and look at it maybe how it's done comparison to the competitors or to the market. And then push your model. If I double down investment on this, what will get us? If I stop investment, if we, extend this feature, what does that 0 to infinity look like? And you really start to understand your boundaries and your guardrails, and not just looking at the data that is presented to you. And then finally, this parallel or holistic view, summary versus synthesis. The difference is summary is simply showing the data. Synthesis is data plus judgment. So you should always strive to bring that judgment and give a point of view and say, based on what I've seen, this is what I think, or here are 2 or 3 options. Or if you're only seeing data, ask for that judgment. Say, you've spent a lot of time with this information, more than I have. What's your point of view? So always strive for that synthesis versus summary. So I think with that, we'll open it up to questions. And Oded, I think you have some questions already coming in.
Yes. How does QI relate to the long-established and widely practiced concept of decision quality support by decision analysis?
So, Paul?
Oh, that's for me. Decision quality support. I'm not familiar with that as a discipline. It sounds like you're calling out a very specific discipline.
So decision quality, decision analysis is much more of the Q than the I in the QI, right? So in decision analysis, when we teach, and again, think about the 140,000 to 190,000 that we talked about as data scientist shortage versus the managers. Decision analysis often rely purely at the data in order to make the decisions. And what we have realized is that A, people are often afraid of looking at the data because they say, look, I was not the top of my class in math. I don't know how to do decision analysis. Making decisions with data is not anymore a choice. It's a reality. We all have to do it, right? And you're seeing it day in, day out in Google and Amex, and as well as your previous jobs. It is about using the data to actually help you make decisions and combining what your business acumen, your intuition together with the data. And truly the difference comes down to not just taking data analysis for what it is, but rather learning, for example, when do I question the data analysis or the quality support based on, for example, again, it hurts in the stomach. This number hurts in the stomach. And through quantitative intuition, part of what we develop is how do we develop this intuition to combine, again, the Q and the I.
And just, I think the other point of that is we often think as data as the main character in the story, whereas data is basically the supporting character. So when you think around decision quality, decision analysis, figure out, what is that main character versus all the data is basically support and evidence. And what, I always tell my team, make your bottom line your top line, as opposed to leading with all the data and all the analysis. Make your bottom line your top line, and then you bring in all that data to support that decision.
So I have a question for you, Chris. You mentioned help me understand. And we have a question from someone in the audience saying, do you have any other specific advice for someone like me in program management who actually doesn't have the right questions regarding their projects, someone that doesn't necessarily have the technical skills? I think that leads straight to these what surprised you type of a question, right?
Yeah, so there's I would say probably 3 or 4 questions you could add to your toolbox, that standard questions. And these are just suggestions. This is what I actually use every day, both personally and with my team. So first of all, help me understand, because my goal when I ask questions is to learn and to expand the conversation. Another great question is, what surprised you? So, simple 3-word question. And why surprise? Surprise is a bias killer. Surprise, enables who's ever presenting to say, you know what, I'm not, I didn't expect this, or I didn't understand this. We often look at, a data point and we're like, this doesn't fit the pattern. When you ask, tell me what surprised you, you're providing a bit of freedom, to that presenter to say, I know you've done all this analysis. Tell me what you didn't expect. So that's number 2, what surprised you? Number 3 is, I wish I knew. And that's a great technique if you have to do any kind of brainstorming or hypothesis generation session. So it's not about the data. Say, what do you wish you knew? And this way, it's not upon you as a program manager to come up with the answer, but you're just, sparking that dialogue. So, those are 3 very practical and approachable, almost deceptively simple techniques that I could tell you, if you start to apply them on a regular basis, you will change the dialogue.
And, even if you are not part of the strategy formulation for a particular business, but you're part of the interrogation, you can look at that data and say, does this data make sense? Is it true? Why do we trust this data? And so some of that is, there's analytics that help you figure out the verity of the data, the truthfulness of the data, but some of that is also your personal acumen, your knowledge of the particular situation and the business that you're in. I often think about the best decision makers understand their company and understand their industry down at the DNA level. So they have those guardrails, and you can look at something and say, that just doesn't fit. And it could fit because it's an anomaly, and here's a new thing that we need to consider for the business, or it doesn't fit because guess what? That data is just incorrect data. So sniffing that out is a combination of really understanding your business and having some good tools to ask those very questions.
We talk about intuition. Intuition is basically built up from a series of experiences. So if you're a program manager, you probably have managed more programs than possibly anyone else around that table. So, lean into that. You are the expert there to say, you know what, this doesn't feel right. I've managed 3 other programs of this similar size, and something just doesn't feel right. that is your expertise and your intuition that you are bringing, and lean into that.
So one question that came up, and I want to wrap up with that. Is there a book about it? Are you guys planning to write a book? So yes, we are. We haven't done it yet, but it's on the top of our list of to do. That being said, there is a book that predates Quantitative Intuition. It's a book that Chris and Paul have written about drinking from the fire hose. This was the if you will, the building blocks towards Quantitative Intuition, which is indeed our next book to write. But thank you all of you. We are just running out of time. Thank you all of you for joining us for this webinar. And again, if you want to hear more about Quantitative Intuition, feel free to contact us, as well as, again, the programs that we teach at Columbia Business School around this exact topic of Quantitative Intuition. So thank you for joining us in this cold afternoon.
Great. Thank you.